record.
Hello, I'm Jeff Kramer, the author of Infinite Resources, and I'm here with Roger Carlson, the author of the Saving the World Before Breakfast series of books. And today, together, we're saving the world before breakfast with Infinite Resources. And Roger has a small presentation today on river flood mitigation. And with that, I will hand it over to him to start the presentation.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. And, the topic of saving lives and property is back in the news. Just on July 4th, there was a big flood in Texas, in Kerr County, and that area has been getting serious rain today. And they're telling people, all the boats, to get off of the river. There might be a flood happening. So this topic applies not just in Texas, but in a number of places, which we'll get to. Actually, starting Texas, back in the Rapid City, South Dakota, where there was a major flood about 50 years ago, and the Missouri River, which had a small flood in 2011, which could be bigger, and the poster child of river flooding, China, particularly South China, in the last couple of months. So we'll start with first, I'll see about doing a share and see if we can get to, there it is. And we can check for year end.
Yeah, I
Can you
can see
confirm
the
you're seeing it?
presentation. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So there it
I don't
is.
know
We'll
if you want to
start.
go full screen or not. Last time we had some technical issues when you tried to do full screen. So
Yeah, and I can use my cheater on the side to, if I want to get back to somewhere else. So
sure.
there it is, river flood mitigation. And I got semi-biblical with the wise man builds his house on a rock and on higher ground is my addition. Watch out for the lightning bolts coming my way for rewriting the Bible there. So this is first rain minder is from the Texas Hill Country. And the history on it is that there was this on the Guadalupe River. There's a plain which is cut by a bunch of steep canyons, and it goes down to the lowlands. And the lowlands are the ones that get the flood. And it's a lot of water. It can come fast from, typically there might be a hurricane or large tropical storm, and it bumps into a high pressure zone, which stops it. And then when that happens, then there'll be a serious high rains, and much like a possible future thing, it has happened in the past. Sometimes California gets some serious floods from lots of water coming down from the mountains. Anyway, this recent flood was 130 deaths, roughly. We don't know. People show up a year later and say, "Yeah, I moved to Oklahoma and now I'm coming back to visit relatives." You think I'm dead? No, not anymore. Glad to see you. So this is Kerrville, Texas. It's in Kerr County. And I tried to wait a little while because there was just so many, people were grieving and everything. And there still are, but the worst of it is over, hopefully. So the things it's not global warming, because as I'll mention later, they've had floods like this since 1819, which was just 3 years after the 1816 and froze to death when it was very cold in the end of the Little Ice Age. And it's not Donald Trump's budget cuts. They haven't gone into effect yet. Maybe if there's a flood 20 years from now, they can blame him. It's not DEA emergency staff, although it would have been better if the person in charge of that had sent the patrols out or the rescue crews out sooner, and it might have saved a few lives. But the major part of it was just the flood there. And then there was another one. There was a lack of sirens. Well, maybe a few more people might have gone, but that's not it. What it is, this is flash flood alley. And Char Miller, who's an expert on, he's a historian and a environmental analyst. So he says, we forget that we don't want to what we don't want to remember. This is especially true for anyone living in Flash Flood Alley, or what we like to call the hill country. That's what they call it. And in good days, they call it the hill country. And he had an article on that in Texas Observer, which is a fun magazine that very incisively covers Texas politics in particular, and floods in this case. So some of the history, like I mentioned, there was a major flood in San Antonio in 1819, about almost two, or no, more than 2 centuries ago. So these things have been happening. In 1921, there were about 200 and some people killed. In 1987, there were several dozens of people killed. So these things have been happening over and over again. And where I get a little cantankerous about it is like, well, maybe you should do something different. And the difference I noticed was that there's two camps. Camp La Junta, or they might actually call it Junta because, as they said, a Texan told me, we won the war, so we get to pronounce them the way we want. Anyway, there were 400 child campers. The counselors spotted the water, roused them up. They went to higher ground. Higher ground. Hey, what a comment. About 5 miles further downriver, there were 28 child campers at Camp Mystic. There's 28 people that died there, including counselors. And my thought is, I wonder how far up from in heights Camp Mystic was compared with Camp La Junta. My suspicion is that they were closer to the river, and people love the rivers. They like waters. They want to be by the ocean. They want to be by the lake. They want to be by the river. But the rivers in downstream from the hill country are particularly prone to really big rises in water in a short period of time. But if possible, my thought is like Camp La Junta, they saw their cabins go floating away. How about if the cabins had been built up the hill where they evacuated to? It would have been more expensive to probably have a driveway, maybe a gravel driveway, even better blacktop going up the hill, and they could still go down and have the boats and whatever things by the river. So build on higher ground. That's going to be a broken record sort of thing that keeps popping up in this talk. And then it goes to 1972, and this actually there were Rapid Creek and several other creeks in that area. The biggest one being Rapid Creek, hence the name of Rapid City. They had floods as far as the white settlers, and I'm sure the Indians knew about it before. But anyway, in 1935, during the New Deal, the New Deal people under Franklin Delano Roosevelt wanted to do things for people and find jobs for workers. So they built a dam on Rapid Creek. Well and good. And it was, the dam had boats on it. You could swim in it. It was wonderful. That was 1935. Well, by 35 years later, they were kind of worrying about the dam. Maybe it wasn't quite as well constructed as they thought it should be. And maybe they should do a bigger dam. They hadn't got to it. But meanwhile, people had, because there was a dam upstream, they said, well, we can build here. And in fact, if you wanted to get a loan, you couldn't get a loan on the hills above the floodplain. The only place you could get a loan for building a house or a motel was to be in the floodplain.
So
And
what
that's
was the
that key
rationale
word
behind
called
that?
floodplain. Say
Yeah,
again?
sorry. What was the rationale behind them saying you couldn't get a loan on the hill? You have to build on the floodplain.
I met an old man who's a rancher outside of town. And about 1908, they had another big flood. In those days, they had spring wagons. So he and his siblings were riding on the back of a spring wagon, and the horses had water almost up to their bridles, pulling that wagon, getting out of Rapid Creek floodplain. Meanwhile, uh, or so after that, for decades, he went around and told people, do not build down here. You can see the watermarks on the canyon walls outside on the sides of the valley.
Right.
This is where the water was. If you build down there, you're going to be underwater, which indeed happened. And
But why wouldn't the banks loan to somebody if they wanted to build up on the hill as opposed to
well, it's more expensive to build up there, and it's more scenic down in the nice valley. It'd be a lot more expensive because the hills are fairly steep there.
so I guess what I'm asking is, was it actually, did they actually prevent people from building on the valley, or it was just less expensive to build in the
It
valley?
was you could not get a loan. You
Hmm.
could build up there if you had enough money to build your own house. A few rich people did, but most people built in the valley. So in 1935, I mean 1972, there was some heavy thunderstorms in the up in the they're called hills there, although they're bigger than the what we call mountains in Southern California. It's like Harney Peak is like 6,000 feet up, and that's about 4,000 feet higher than the surrounding plains.
Hmm.
Well, that built up, and it came fast, so it knocked down some trees, and then the trees will push boats along. So between the trees, boats, and other debris, it clogged up the spillway. It, the water overtopped the dam, cut through the dam, and suddenly there was this huge flood that came down. And there's a number of videos. You just go to Google or go to YouTube and Google Rapid City Flood. And several documentaries have been made about this, about how people uh, climbed up into their attics and drowned there, or they climbed up on the roofs and they were sailing down the river on their houses or in their cars. They were driving along, and occasionally they'd see a propane tank drift by, and when a propane tank hit something, it would explode, and people were screaming, and all the power was out, and so people higher up on the banks, there were houses built a little higher, and they were fine. But it sounded like a giant railroad train going by for like half an hour or an hour for the highest amount of flood. And about 230 people died. Still, maybe about 10 or 20 missing. Maybe will never ever be found because people were washed away. I was with the National Guard, and we were looking. We were bringing supplies, checking on people, and so on. And there were big sandbars that were made. They were 10, 20 feet high, and there would be boards and shingles and dresser drawers and clothes and tree limbs in these big sandbars. So there was, if there were bodies 20 feet down, we could, it would take years to dig through all those sandbars that were made. And the lesson from that was Corps of Engineers and the local the Rapid City government said, okay, all the, all the floodplain area in the valley is condemned. You can have parks in there. You can even have a place with there's a big arena for going to concerts and things. But there'll be no houses and no motels where people will sleep because that's another lesson from Texas and other places. Once people go to sleep, it's hard to roust them out. And like the Texas flood in Kerrville area, it was 4 o'clock when the thing started, the water started rising. So you kind of try to wake people up and know if the power goes out, it's pitch black and you can't hear because the roaring of the water. So, hey, there's wonderful parks in there and they're watching things. They have better sensors in the river. If the river goes up, the creek goes up, uh, there's a warning down below. And so, yes, they have their sirens. Just like in the Kerrville area, they can have some more sirens put in and so on. But the biggest thing is don't have people sleeping in the floodplain.
Yeah.
And, and then I'll go on to, I've also been in other areas of the Missouri River, and that place that always had great floods on the river in the 1800s when the settlers, European settlers, first started arriving in the spring. There would always be giant floods and ice dams would form. And when the ice dam would form, eventually it would break as as it melted and so on. And so the flood would be much bigger when that ice dam broke. In fact, where I went to school was the University of South Dakota at Vermilion. And in the about the mid 1800s when they were formed, they were in a great location. They were right on the river for the riverboats. So the river was much more important then. They were right on the river, except one spring they heard again it sounded like a giant railroad train coming. The people in Handley, there was they were right on the edge of the floodplain, so they just ran uphill with only the shoes and the clothes on their back to get up there. Left everything, and whoosh, the town was gone. And that to add insult to injury, when the waters went down, the river had moved 7 miles within the floodplain. And there's a big floodplain with the Missouri River. It's a, it is actually the bigger river that the Mississippi comes into.
Hmm.
So Vermilion rebuilt the town on the bluff, and it's a small town. It managed to get a university, so they have their 5,000 students or something like that now. One of the one of the bigger schools in the state. Anyway, the lesson there is don't build there. Well, finally in the 1950s, the government program was to build some big rolled earth dams. And so there would never be, they said, well, there'll never be a flood again. And that's why there was an area where I used to go canoeing when I was going to school there. And we'd get our beer and hot dogs and potatoes that we could barbecue, and we'd go canoeing in there was an area called Dakota Dunes, or pardon me, the Dunes. And in the spring, the water would race through there. There would be little islands with cottonwood trees and whatnot. And some years, the water would uproot some trees, and you'd see great big trees flowing away. And then by later in the year, you could walk through and canoe through and have set lines for catfish. It was a wonderful place. Well, after people said, hey, we have these dams, they build houses on the riverbank, just above the river. So that was all good until after years and years of very dry things when dams, the water around the dams dropped 20 feet or thereabouts and ring around the reservoir sort of thing of dry land. Then there was a big snowfall. And Corps of Engineers said, uh-oh, we've got to drain a lot of water out. So they opened the cocks up full blast. And nobody ever seen it flowing that much. But at least they could plan ahead. They said, we know it's a lot melting, it's coming, it's rising. So on this date, we're going to open the water. And in the meantime, were letting contracts to try to build temporary levees or getting sandbags out to everybody. And so there was no loss of life. That worked out better. Although the rich people who had bought into the place that was called Dakota Dunes, I said the wrong thing, said that name first. It's now called Dakota Dunes. Some fairly well-to-do people built there. Corps of the Engineers spent the summer helping keep that place dry. It's like part of the welfare for rich people program. Anyway, that takes us to, I mean, there's a lesson there. They did one thing well. They did share information. Takes us to the poster child. Uh, in China, they've managed to have all the bad things. For centuries, people did what people always did. They built right down by the river. If a big flood came, hundreds or thousands of people would die, and then after they started recovering, they'd build back in. Well, they have a lot of those cities built on the rivers, and they have kind of levees built up and things. But if a real bad flood comes, they're in trouble. Well, some real big floods came because number one, there was some poor construction. There's comments about uh, tofu steel used in some of the construction, and it's people cheated, and their steel was poor quality for the rebar, and that makes dams fail. They've had some spectacular dam failures, and this spring they had some notable failures, and some of the dams broke, and they said, well, to save other dams, we'll just release water. But they never told anybody, not even like a 2 hours notice. It's just the first people knew was the water was coming into their homes. And so there's
It's
always
amazing to
horrendous
think of that.
videos of cars and trucks and houses
Now
floating
you're talking about
downstream.
you're talking about the more recent floods now with the cars and all that stuff. But I know China's had a history of flooding, like you say, for centuries, and I think I don't remember the years off the top of my head, but they had two major flooding incidents where I think dams failed and hundreds of thousands of people died in a single event, which is
Yeah, I
just
think in the 50s, I want to say Bangio, they've got a lot of vowels at the end. It's almost looked like a Hawaiian word, Banquoia or something. I think they lost a couple 100,000 people, which the government, this is the other aspect of the notification. They kept the casualty numbers largely secret. And likewise today, it's like, well, maybe we might have lost two or three people. Well, maybe it was like two or 300 people from that town and another 500 from the next town downriver and so on. And of course, they're so proud of their Three Gorges Dam, which is upriver from Shanghai. And the estimate is if the Three Gorges Dam were to fail, it might be 5 or 10 million people in the area around Shanghai that would die.
let me I actually just looked it up. So the estimated deaths from the worst flooding disasters, and the first three of them come from China. So
Mhm.
the worst one, the estimated deaths were someplace between 1 and 2 million people. That was in 1887, and it's called the Yellow River Flood. I'm looking at
Mhm.
Wikipedia as the list of
Yeah.
deadliest floods. And then in 1931, they had a series of floods, and the estimated death toll was between 422,000 to 2 million. And
Mhm.
then 1938, the Yellow River flood again, uh, between 470,000 and 500,000 people died in that event.
Yeah. That I don't think that was an accidental one. That was when the nationalist Chinese government broke levees and things to try to kill some of the Japanese invaders.
Mhm.
That was a war that was a tough war. They fought a lot of blood on that one. But then the other one was the biggest one in communist Chinese days, The thought is that that one was not well designed, and again, they should have uh, drained more kept it at a lower level when the storms were coming in, because it's similar. Uh, not the rain doesn't get stopped like in Texas, but there are typhoons, and, and they come. If they even go a little slower and pick up rain, you have yeah, similar high levels of like 10 to 15 inches in a day's time. So, yeah. Oh, there is one thing I can, if anybody's interested, I've got some of the references on there about the 20, did I say 2011 Missouri? Yeah, 2011 Missouri floods in central Texas. That was Char Williams, who's actually over by the one of the universities near me in California. He's a uh, whoops. Oh yeah, he's in. He writes a lot about Texas, and yeah, the 1921 flood. That was a U.S. Geological Survey, and there's some things about the Guadalupe River floods again, where they were saying uh, at night people are not nearly so good at getting up and around. Deadlier at night. That was GRIST, which is an environmental outfit. It was a great analysis that they had about why applies with not having a rapid city flood. If you don't
Mhm.
have people sleeping in the flood zone.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I got back to that. And then now we can, if anybody wanted to watch it, they could record this and I will stop the share. So now we're back.
Yeah, so
And
that's quite an interesting summary, and it's quite instructive to look at that Wikipedia page because, we're talking, and of course, it's a huge tragedy. What did you say? 200 people died approximately in the Texas floods now?
uh, about 130 in the recent ones. 1921 was 200 and some, and there was a 1987 flood that was, I think, several dozen.
And of course, each of those is a tragedy. But when you compare those numbers to, some of the worst floods around the world, it's like there's no comparison. That wouldn't even be a blip on the radar of this million person death from flooding events in China, or even like the 1970 Bola cyclone, which
Mhm.
hit East Pakistan, or today's present day Bangladesh. 300 to 500,000 people died from flooding during that event. So,
Yeah, yeah,
uh,
that was another big one. It, yeah, oceans and tsunamis, and that was another one, especially around Indonesia. Yeah, ocean can do a lot more. It's yeah, yeah for the yeah for the oceans and tsunamis and hurricanes. It's a yeah, it's a much tougher thing. This is,
so
but
here's
if you're in
a
that river area, it's big for you.
yeah, one of the things that I think about, like when I look at all the big floods and the mitigation that we've done here in Canada. So there was a huge flood, I think, in 1950 in Winnipeg, and it was decided at that time they would build a huge bypass around the city. And
Mhm.
they jokingly named it, so and so's ditch, the premier at the time of the province. Uh, and for years, of course, it was never used. But then a few decades later, they had another similar big flood come through, and it saved all of downtown Winnipeg from
All
flooding.
right.
And so,
Mhm.
that huge investment that was made decades before finally paid off. And I know there's a lot of
Mhm.
cases like that in history. In 2013, Calgary was hit, or southern Alberta in general was hit with major flooding. So they had a especially high snowpack, warm weather, and persistent rain that just kept on raining and raining. And so
Mm-hmm.
some areas saw flooding that was the worst they had experienced in over 350 years.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole of downtown Calgary got flooded. So, you know, these high rise buildings,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of them have their power equipment in the basement and that sort of thing. So it caused a lot of problems in that regard. And it happened just a few days or, you know, a few weeks before the Calgary Stampede was set to happen. And so the Stampede came out with their slogan for that year: "Come hell or high water, we will have a stampede." And they did a tremendous job of cleaning up the grounds because like literally the Stampede grounds had been under like, I don't know, 4 feet of water or something pretty much over the whole
Mm.
area because they're right very close to the confluence of the Bow River and the Elbow River. And the Elbow River in particular had seen a tremendous amount of flooding. And in response to
Mhm.
that, that was again a one in they don't know how many years, but maybe 350-year type flood.
Mhm.
Um, they said, you know what we're going to do? Because 5 years previous to that, they'd seen a significant amount of flooding, not nearly as bad, but significant. They said we're going to on the Elbow River, we're going to build this huge reservoir that would be able to handle as much water as we saw in that flooding event. And we're kind of lucky in the sense that there are significant portions of the prairies, even around Calgary, that aren't highly populated.
Mhm.
And so they're able to build this big diversion complex and contain the water in a low area, and then slowly release it after the flooding event happens.
Mhm.
So that's one solution. The other thing that they decided to do along the Bow River is they built in flood barriers, and they made
Mhm.
them so that they're like, you know, benches and things. It's kind of similar to what New York City is doing for their ocean barrier as they expect sea
Mhm.
level to rise and so forth. They made it so that in a flooding situation they can close these things, and it'll give them an extra, I don't know,
Mhm.
5 or 6 feet of flood protection. But
Yeah, like in Venice and London, both have similar
yeah,
things that they can raise, which finally got built in Venice. There was some snide
and
anti-Italian jokes
aren't
about
they
the
still?
delays.
They still have some issues in terms of it working properly, don't they? The Mose project, I think it's called.
Uh, I hadn't. I thought it worked, but then maybe I just got the first report and didn't hear the
I
muttering about mechanical problems.
It's been an ongoing project for years, so maybe they've worked out the issues. But yeah, the Thames flood barrier has been in the UK since the 70s, I think, right?
Mhm.
And
I don't
it's
know. I don't know when they put it up, but they have it. They only need it when it's going to be really, really high water, and then I guess they would inflate the barrier to come up, and
mm,
boom, then they've got it. And other times it's on the bottom of the river, so the ships can go in and out.
yeah, and that has more to do with the ocean. Like if they get a low pressure system coming in to the North
Mhm.
Sea, and it's the same kind of rationale. Like in Holland, they built all the dikes, and they're also supposed
Mhm.
to be resistant to these once in, I don't know, 50-year kind of weather events
Mhm.
where the pressure is really low over the North Sea and it raises sea level by
Mhm.
with the high tides. It raises sea level
Mhm.
well above the normal. So.
Mhm. Or
And
actually, going more with that, it's also uh, tides. You're talking about air pressure and tides. In fact, there
right.
was, speaking of New York, the area of New York in the early 1800s, had a serious storm that blew salt onto, miles inland. There was that much wind and stuff, but it was on a low tide uh, period of time. And they were saying if Hurricane Sandy, or when it became superstorm because it dropped from hurricane status, but if
Yeah.
it had come uh, with a high tide, it would have done if that storm had early in the 1800s had come with a high tide like Sandy had, then it would have killed a lot of people. They didn't have that many, but not as
Mhm.
many as today, but they had, I think, still a couple million people in the New York area, fairly close to the shore. And what was it? I forget what other, yeah, South Massachusetts and places like that. So,
Yeah. Well,
yeah, yeah,
the tide shift.
tide, and air pressure.
Yeah. Sorry, the tides shift, what, every 6 hours or so, right?
It's it's more complicated than that. There's like once a year there's a king tide,
All right. Yeah.
and
The
then I
spring
forget what the
tides, the neap
lower one.
tides. Yeah. Yeah.
When the moon and the sun are aligned, you get the gravity of both of them for
Yeah.
the
Those are the
highest
spring
tide.
tides. But I mean, in terms of the rotation, the moon is the dominant factor because it's much closer than the sun.
Yeah,
And so as the Earth rotates, it goes through two high tide bulges and two low tide periods, right?
it's that sounds about right. All I know is when you go out to the boat, you're either walking at a level or you're going down or up, depending on how your gangplanks are set.
Yeah.
And you look at the chart. Somebody figures them out.
Yeah. So other mitigation things that can be done against flooding. Well, obviously dams, when they're designed well and work properly, those are excellent
Mhm.
mitigation factors. But what we found, like in Calgary, they have the Glenmore Reservoir, which is on the Elbow River. And I think what one of the engineers said was, yeah, you could fill up the entire Glenmore Reservoir with 3 hours of the flow that they had in that particular event back in 2013.
Mhm.
And so it doesn't provide much protection in an extreme case like that.
Yeah, well,
Um,
that's another one where uh, they're they're getting better meteorological forecasts, but yeah, that's the thing. If you've got if you know for sure this in 2 days it's coming, well, you open up
sure.
all the drains and yeah, go for glory there.
And they did that, and they still had water crusting over the top of the reservoir. And of course, dams are designed so that in those kinds of flooding situations, you don't want to have the dam eroded, and
Hmm.
so they design like spillways and fusible sections, they call them, that can break away. Close to my home, our engineering group did a tour of the Dixon Dam, and that's on the Red Deer River.
Hmm.
And it's quite interesting because they got a small little power plant. It doesn't produce a lot of, well, 300 kilovolts or whatever it is there, kilowatt. But
Well, that
so
would be a tiny amount,
it's a
300
relatively small,
kilowatts.
yeah. They have three generators, and the reason is because the Red Deer River, the river flow is relatively small. Um,
Mhm.
in the wintertime, it drops to almost nothing. Well, when I say almost nothing, a couple of cubic meters a second. But in the
That is
springtime,
almost nothing compared with
well,
dams that are
exactly. Yeah,
tens of thousands of, well, not, yeah, tens of thousands of meters per second in some of the big dams.
right. And so, but in the springtime, it can be, in worst case situation, probably close to 1,000 cubic meters a second.
Mhm.
But the because of the industry downstream, we've got some petrochemical plants. We got the city of Red Deer and other communities along the river. They want to have a minimal flow going through all the time, so that minimum amount of water isn't enough to support the industry. And so they said,
Mhm.
well, we need to have a flow rate of at least 3 cubic meters per second coming out of the dam, and that's why they have relatively small amount of hydroelectric production there. So it's designed to operate with the minimal amount in mind, but then it protects to some extent from the
Mhm.
flooding,
Yeah.
and it's a reservoir. It's able to hold a significant amount of
Mhm.
water, so you can keep that minimal flow going year round, and it's been a great success. But back in
Mhm.
2013, when they had that flooding, that whole valley got flooded out. Um,
Mhm.
they didn't they didn't have to use the fusible portion of the dam, so they were just able to control it with the water flowing over the spillway. So it didn't reach those emergency levels, but it was still enough to flood anyone who was living in the floodplain down below
Mhm.
it. So
Yeah. Well, there's a difference. The Rapid Dam, the dam above Rapid City, it had a spillway, but the that was to the side. The rest top of the dam that could not take water.
mhm,
So, and the water just cut it like a knife.
yeah,
Just like I've seen roads that if you're going along, there's the road, and all of a sudden, whoop,
yeah.
there's a little bit of water flowing in the bottom, uh, 10 feet down below where there was a road.
Well, in California, you've had a couple of major dam failures too, right?
The St. Francis Dam in the early 1900s
Oh, no,
was,
there's one more recent than that. It was like a major dam, and the concrete spillway got torn up and caused the whole dam to fail, as I recall.
hmm, my
I'll look
intermediate.
it up while we're chatting here.
Yeah, while you're looking at, there was another one, Oroville Dam
That's the
was the
one I'm
one
thinking about. Yeah.
that didn't fail. They were afraid it would fail, and they said, "Wait a minute, we found the culprit. This guy designed it wrong." Well, it turned out that guy had designed it while he was still a student in college, and then he had gone to work for the state and been an engineer for 40 years and retired. So
Right,
the retired guy, it was his fault. But hey, how come nobody checked him for like 40 years?
right. Well, okay, and I'm just looking at a picture of it. So, like you said, the dam itself held, but the spillway got completely eroded away, and it went down a different track or something.
Mhm.
It's quite interesting. Anyway,
Yeah,
it just goes to show that dams are, I mean, they're wonderful inventions and great at conserving a natural resource. Um, but they're inventions of human beings, so they've got flaws in them too.
yeah. So you don't assume that the dam will always hold. You don't build houses directly below the dam, which has happened in many parts of the world. Duh.
So there's a project being built in northeastern BC right now. It's called the Site C Dam.
Hmm.
So along I believe it's the Athabasca River. Oh, sorry, the Peace River. So it's called Site C because there have been two other dams built before it
Hmm.
along the river, and this one's the third one in line. It's a very interesting project. It's the original cost estimate was something like $6 billion, and like so many of these projects, it's more than doubled now. But
Hmm.
they're predicting that it's going to be able to supply electricity for close to 1 million people. Well, it's let's see, expected capacity of 1,100 megawatts, so 1.1 gigawatts of power, annual output of 4.6 gigawatt hours.
Yeah, like
Um,
about the size of a typical real big coal or nuclear plant
exactly, yeah.
back in the day. Now we want to go with small modular reactors, but that's another story.
Well, Diablo Canyon in California has got 4 gigawatts of capacity, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's more than one unit. So yeah, that's how they got around that. So I don't think one unit is that big. I think they might be like three
Yeah.
or maybe even four units in the plant. But yeah, it ends up with a bigger amount.
And the
Whatever you
Three
say, I'll
Gorges
take your word
Dam.
for
Yeah, the Three
it.
Gorges Dam, if I'm just going by memory here, I'll double click it, but I think they have a maximum capacity of 13 gigawatts. It's huge in
Yeah,
comparison to even the Site
yeah,
C.
they are the biggest dam now. Until it gets uh, double worrisome, they want to build a big dam in Tibet. It would be just immensely bigger than Three Gorges.
Yeah, wow. Okay, so I'll take that back. Three Gorges Dam is the world's largest power station by installed capacity, 22.5 gigawatts of
Yeah.
I mean, they don't get produce that continuously, but that's the maximum installed capacity. Now, what's interesting about the Three Gorges Dam, and this is one of the things that I've heard is, if China was to invade Taiwan, that would be one of their first counterattacks would be to try to hit the Three Gorges Dam and cause all sorts of economic havoc and havoc within the country in
Hmm.
response to that. So I don't know what
Yes,
kind of
a
air
lot, there's
defenses.
speculation there that it would be that would be the Taiwanese doomsday defense because
Exactly. Yeah.
The mainland government of China would be really unhappy with them at that point.
Well,
Unhappier than they are have been since 1949 when they managed to defeat the
this
nationalists
goes
on
back.
land.
Yeah, I'm reading a book right now, Better Angels of Our Nature by Steven Pinker, and it's talking about the
Hmm.
long peace and how we've managed to have peace for so many years, and there have been no major wars directly between
Yeah,
major powers.
until the last couple of years.
Well, exactly. But one of the section that I'm reading right now is about nuclear weapons and how they've never been used, and it's kind of a big deterrent. And it's kind of interesting to think a country invests this huge amount of money for nuclear defense, and yet there's a taboo on ever using nuclear weapons. And even like with Russia and Ukraine, um, I think the United States has, at least under the Biden administration, made it clear that you're not to use nuclear weapons, even tactical nukes against Ukraine. And by the way, we know exactly where you are, Mr. Putin. if you
Yeah.
if you if you choose to disobey this condition that we're placing on the war or whatever.
Yeah, Trump did that game with the Taliban. He gave him a picture of the guy, the head Taliban, it's a house.
Yeah,
He
yeah,
said, so don't cross me.
yeah,
But yeah, the biggest thing for Russia and Russian nuclear weapons is their targets would all be to the southwest of them. So if they bomb Kiev, there's going to be a cloud of radioactive particles
yeah.
coming to the east over Russia.
Yeah, assuming that they don't actually time it for meteorological winds that blow the other direction. I know the prevailing winds are west to east in that region, just like here
Oh,
where I
yeah,
live.
that's right. They could be devious that way because when Chernobyl went, it was discovered because the Swedes spotted there was a big spike in radiation, and so they
Yeah.
called Poland and said, "What the hell have you been doing?" And the Poles said, "We haven't been doing anything, but we already noticed the spike too, and it was at this time." And so they timed it. Ah, it happened in Poland at this time. A couple hours later, it happened in Sweden. It's coming from the south,
Yeah,
from well, actually southeast from
yeah.
uh, Chernobyl.
But it also makes sense if Russia's goal is to actually capture and use the land of Ukraine, it probably makes sense that they don't turn it into a radioactive wasteland in the process. So
Yeah,
that's another reason not to use nukes in that
yeah.
particular
Oh,
war.
yeah. And another one about that was any large-scale use of nuclear weapons. A lot of that radioactive material would be washed down to the Black Sea,
Right.
which includes a lot more of Russia on the northeast and east coasts there. So, including their favorite touristy places, like where Putin's house is in Sochi.
Sochi, yeah. Yeah. Anyway, but getting back to flood mitigation, so the same sort of things that you see on coastal barriers to prevent erosion.
Mhm.
I've seen, putting rocks like natural boulders up on river banks that would be in danger of being eroded, or even concrete barriers
Mhm.
to do that. In Indonesia, they've got a highway tunnel in one of their cities, I think Jakarta or something, um, where it's designed that if there's flooding, that whole tunnel acts as a water a drainage system to the ocean, which I think is
Wow.
absolutely brilliant. And independently, I came up
Mhm.
with the same idea after the Calgary floods. I was thinking, man, wouldn't it be neat if in the future we could have a road system that basically follows the river, but you could build it with these concrete tunnel blocks like they do when they're going underneath channels and stuff like
Mhm.
that. And you build it in segments and just go along and excavate the river as you're going along. And then this could be used as a freeway, 99.9% of the time. But if there's a flood,
It
it
wouldn't
just
freeze in
continues.
the winter.
Well, it wouldn't exactly. It would be a much safer way to get around. And I was thinking you could do that along the Bow River, so on the north part going through downtown. But you could also do it so that you'd have a connector from the south, which would bypass the Glenmore Reservoir on the
Mhm.
Elbow River and go to downtown, and uh, and then drain it directly into the Bow River with bypassing the downtown altogether. So
Mhm.
who knows if this new bypass that they built isn't sufficient for flooding conditions, maybe we can look at that. But the thing is, the idea behind it is you're building it primarily as infrastructure for traffic, and in the event of emergency, it has a double bonus basically.
Yeah. Although uh, my wife is, we went to the Eisenhower Tunnel that I think is about 5 miles long,
Yeah.
going to Denver, yeah, west of Denver, and it goes underneath the mountains. So somebody like her, even more so, like, oh, we're driving 20 miles
Yeah.
underneath a river. Like, whoa. Matter of fact, I would be a little worried about it because a
Yeah, no,
similar thing.
I
There's
understand
thoughts
that.
about a tunnel that would go underneath between Siberia and Alaska, so you could have freeways going all the way from uh, Spain to New York City,
Right.
but that tunnel would have to be really long and be several hundred feet underwater.
And it goes through an earthquake zone. Yeah. So
Hmm.
you're really taking your engineers well, engineers are taking people's lives in their hands. We do that all
Yeah.
the time though, right?
Yeah, other than those things, it's just fine.
But it's interesting. You talk about reliability and earthquakes and stuff like this Site C dam. I think they're designing it so that it would be able to withstand a once in 1,000 year earthquake, like probably
Hmm.
magnitude 9 or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, and that's pretty impressive that they're putting that kind of uh, design into it because, well, I mean, that's one of the concerns. Of course, you never want to have a dam break, right? So you overbuild it,
Yes.
and
Well,
especially,
particularly there because BC is part of the Ring of Fire.
yeah,
Uh, and example was what was it? Was it 1962 when the big Alaska quake, which was
yeah,
like 8 or something like that?
yeah.
So that same ring goes down say, uh, through Washington, Oregon,
Hmm.
but yeah, it
Yeah.
can
So
big
just to give
subduction
you
zone and anything can
the
happen there.
location of this dam is actually on the east side of the Rockies, so it's not that close to the Ring of Fire, but it's still a tectonically active location. So you never know what's going to
Hmm.
happen there. But they tend to have, instead of it being like slip faults and transverse faults, I got those backwards. But um, the
It's
mountains,
subduction.
yeah,
I
the
think the
mountains tend to
Pacific
push
plate
up
is
on
going
themselves.
underneath the uh, North American plate,
Yeah,
and it carries water down with it, and the water is what makes it explosive.
right, right. But what I'm saying is we are in this particular area. You know, the land is being pushed together to form the mountains, and what happens is it kind of creates this curved
Mm,
fault,
yeah.
and it kind of you look at the mountains and you can see the what used to be horizontal flat ocean
Mm,
floor is now up at a 60-degree angle or something.
oh yeah. I've got that on the hill behind my house.
Yeah, so it's not that same geologically earthquake active zone that they have on the west coast, but of course, a lot of people are saying that Cascadia is way overdue for another major earthquake,
Mhm.
which would be probably on the scale of something like the 1950s Alaska earthquake, or some of these large earthquakes in Chile. Because the last time that they had one, indigenous peoples along the coast got wiped out to a large extent. Estimates are up to 90% of them died from the tsunamis. But
Mhm.
the Japanese recorded this huge tsunami without ever having felt an earthquake. So the wave made it across the entire
Yeah.
Pacific Ocean and was
Mhm.
recorded in Japan.
Yeah, it was a famous uh, Japanese painting. I think it's even called The Wave
The wave,
or
yeah,
something. And from that, they said, "Hey, why did they have a picture?" And I think they had some accounts of different tsunamis, which are harbor waves.
yeah,
And it said, "Yeah, if it's on these ports, and they didn't feel the earthquake, so it's probably off there." And that's where was it? Randall Carlson, no relation, calls it astromythology, where the geologists ask the local people and they get maybe clues of something that might have happened. And that was all the accounts about the people that were out fishing and they went sailing into land and ended up in trees, or people that climbed up in trees to manage to stay alive. And so that's where they connected the things, and that's why they now have designated escape routes and signs. If there's an earthquake, go this. Or if you hear about a tsunami, go this way.
yeah. Yeah, Cascadia is getting. They have two cases: a giant earthquake that could hit them, and of course, Mount Rainier recently has been quite active with earthquakes as well. It's
Yeah, a
indicating
lot of
that,
microquakes.
yeah. So you got to wonder if a major earthquake happened, would that also potentially trigger a volcanic eruption at the same time? I mean, it's not out of the question. In fact,
Yeah, it's
like,
one of those things where they try to predict, and it wasn't work. So I forget. I think the Chinese one time they got a prediction of an earthquake, and they had tents and things, and they people got out of the city, and the earthquake happened. They were in the tents. They said, "We really got this socked." And then several years later, it was an earthquake, totally blindsided them. They had no idea it was coming. I was
sure,
like, maybe I guess we were just lucky the first time. Back to the drawing board.
yeah. So that famous picture is called "The Great Wave off Kanagawa."
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah. Anyway, um, yeah. So fascinating stuff. Do you have anything more to say about flood mitigation?
I think I've ran out of things, and we went out to sea a little bit there, but I figured it would kind of drift to the bigger things. I guess the only other thing would be, yeah, tsunamis. Goes back to the 2002, I believe it was,
Hmm.
last earthquake in Indonesia, which is another side of the Ring of Fire,
Right.
and how that takes places like 10 or 20 foot. Gosh, I can't remember what it was, 10 or 20 feet drop somewhere along a big line in the ocean,
Yeah.
and people had little warning because it was so quickly between the place of the slip and the other places
Yeah.
versus other places like India and Thailand where they had hours and they should have remembered. That's
Yeah. Well, you would think that the people who died in Thailand, in Phuket and tourist areas like that. Like you say, they had quite a bit of time and warning from the Indonesia portion. They should have been evacuating people
Mhm.
ahead of time, but
They should have been evacuating instead of running onto out onto what had been the the shallows and
yeah,
taking pictures and picking up seashells.
yeah,
These,
exactly.
and these are educated people, including Americans, Europeans, and it was this. Conversely, I think it was either India or Sri Lanka, where a guy who'd read I think it was Popular Mechanics or Discover magazine, he went running out and said, "I saw this article. That's a tidal wave.
Yeah,
You've got to go to higher ground." And he saved some dozens of people who
yeah.
ran back to higher ground.
It's amazing. Well, a single person can affect so many people's lives, and in
Hmm.
that case, it's 24 other people. Well, I mean, if you invent a procedure like implanting a stent in a heart for to prevent heart attacks or something like that, you can
Hmm.
impact millions of lives. So,
Yeah. Or if I guess it's semi-optimistic. That was optimistic. The old rancher who all his life he kept trying to warn them if they'd listened to him, they would have not built in the floodplain by Rapid
mhm,
City.
mhm.
So, hey, sometimes those people talking about the end is nigh, sometimes they're right.
Sometimes they're right. Yeah, it's true.
But all you have to
Well,
do is build your house another 20 or 30 feet higher in a lot of cases.
yeah, it's kind of interesting. I'm going to be presenting or be a moderator for a panel at an upcoming conference called "When Words Collide" in Calgary, and the title of the panel is "What's the next big disaster?"
Oh, that sounds likewise. There's been more than 13 uh, Friday the 13th movies. People get a charge out of it. So when's the next big disaster?
Well, I basically the panel is going to be looking at all sorts of things, but we're going to look at everything from nanotechnology to AI to asteroids hitting, impacting to supernovas going off in the local region,
Gamma ray
nuclear,
boosters, uh,
yeah,
gamma
nuclear
ray
fallout.
bursters.
Yeah. So, I mean, the question is, will we make ourselves extinct? Is that the reason why we don't see a lot of intelligent life in the universe, or will the universe itself be just become too treacherous for us to exist on planet Earth? So,
Yeah. Well, when is this thing scheduled to be?
uh, I don't remember the dates off the top of my head. Give me just a second. I do have something
It's
open
called
here.
When Worlds Collide.
When Words Collide, it's a writing conference.
Oh,
And it's Saturday, starts on Friday, August 15th, and runs through Sunday, August 17th in Calgary.
uh, August 15 to 17.
And my talk is going to be on Saturday morning at 10 a.m.
Hmm. Oh, well, this is at our Saving the World and Infinite Resources uh, wheelhouse. So,
Exactly.
what's your topic going to be
What
about?
what are the next big disasters?
That's oh, you're what's the next big disasters?
Right. Yeah.
Ah, oh, the other ones are. That sounds like that's covering the waterfront versus somebody might talk about uh, tsunamis. Somebody else might talk about meteorite hits and
Yeah, I'm thinking more global impact, but you never know. I mean, obviously we can talk about different scales of disasters. So something like the Soviet traps that were created in a fairly short time by lava flows covering thousands of square
oh yeah,
kilometers and
I think
changing.
they've gone back to the Russian traps
Oh,
or
is that right?
Siberian traps.
Yeah, Siberian traps. That's what I said, wasn't it?
Soviet.
Oh, did I say
You
Soviet?
were
I meant
thinking of
Siberian.
that area.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, Siberian traps. Um,
Mhm.
Yeah, anyway, so that of course caused mass extinctions because the entire atmosphere changed, and the change in the atmosphere affected acidity levels in the oceans and that sort of stuff, because tremendous amounts of sulfur dioxide and carbon dioxide
Mhm.
were released in the process. So yeah, it's amazing that that we exist at all, let alone that you and I are chatting right now, thousands of miles apart from each other, and being
Mhm.
able to do so seamlessly, essentially with no time lag.
Yeah, well, that would be another one. For future things, we would get to uh, the Silurian hypothesis. I guess that there might have been previous like dinosaur type creatures that evolved intelligence, and certainly going back to was it I want to say Graham Hancock
Yeah,
was it
yeah.
previous civilizations. The previous civilizations it seems more plausible to me because
It does, and
dinosaurs tended to have
especially
much smaller brains.
yeah, the way he talks about it. There's a Netflix series, I forget what it's called, but it's from him, and he talks about we know that glacial Lake Missoula happened. We know that there were these major floods that went
Hmm.
through the Pacific Northwest, and we presume that it's because a glacier was damming up all of this meltwater, and that
Hmm.
meltwater broke through the dam and in a rapid burst. And I mean, that all makes sense. You can see the
Yeah,
geological
well,
scars.
at glacial Lake Agassiz is further east in
Yeah,
Canada,
yeah,
and
and that,
Missoula and Bonneville. So that's three
yeah.
big lakes, glacial
So,
lakes.
so the
Presumably, there was
Hancock,
similar ones, analogous glacial lakes all across Siberia and Scandinavia,
yeah.
places like that. In fact, there was the English Channel, by some accounts, was created by a giant a flow of meltwater.
Oh, is that right? That's interesting. I hadn't heard that before.
Hmm.
But with Hancock's theory, it has to do with like a meteoroid shower that there are actual strikes of large meteors into the glaciers, which caused instantaneous melting, and that was potentially the cause of some of this flooding as well.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. Like, how could they melt all that ice? So, yeah, but we digress. That'll be for another time.
Well,
We
it's
try to
still on
get
topic with flooding.
rivers and maybe some tsunami relief, but moving a moving a quarter mile inland from on the seacoast and maybe just 20 or 30 feet up from the riverbanks.
Yeah,
So anyway, I will. This one I've got our posting person to help me, so I want to get this one out because this is what's happening. The
right.
drones will continue, I'm sure. So that one has to come out too.
Yeah.
Anyway, have a good evening, and we'll check in with you next week unless something else gets us distracted.
Sounds good, Roger. Thank you for the call today.
Yeah. Okay. Good night to you, and good night to anybody, or so long to anybody tuning in.
Okay, good night.
So,